Before I became a therapist myself, I spent almost 20 years working as a TV journalist, covering science and medicine. Through my job, I had the good fortune to learn about these new approaches in therapy at a very early stage. And because I was also closely acquainted with people who had been suffering from a variety of anxiety disorders for years, I always had a very good overview of the different types of therapy that were already on offer, as well as those that anxiety patients might have to wait years for. So it was thanks to the happy circumstances of my previous career that I became one of the first therapists in Europe to put all of these fantastic new techniques and methods into practice, and even develop them further in my practice. So as such, please try and have some understanding if your previous therapist or psychiatrist has not heard about these new techniques, at least not yet. But now, let's return to the actual subject of our podcast today, and that's about all of the substances that we can now say with certainty that they are capable of triggering off anxieties and panic attacks. There are several medications that can verifiably cause fear and panic. One good example here are the antidepressants. And the absurd reality is that they are still being prescribed today, supposedly to get rid of the very thing that, in reality, they themselves frequently trigger off. And I definitely intend to devote a future podcast in the series to the fact that, despite the constantly growing criticism of these medications, they still remain one of the most common methods worldwide used to try and help anxiety patients. But also the so-called neuroleptic drugs that are given to treat schizophrenia, for instance, are now counted among the potential triggers of fear and panic. As indeed is the prohormone thyroxine, which is administered for an underactive thyroid gland. Women especially, who have been diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, can react with panic attacks to the wrong dose of synthetic thyroxine. What this also means is that it is certainly a good idea to check whether you are still taking the right dose, because this can change over time or as a result of changes to your lifestyle. And a number of my patients have also had good experience here switching their medication to natural thyroid hormone supplements taken from pigs. You can find out more on this area on our website betterlifewithhashimotosdisease.com, with a minus between every word, which my wife and I have set up specially for Hashimoto's thyroiditis patients. But for that, panic attacks are, however, triggered off much more frequently by recreational drugs than by prescription medication. Psychoactive drugs change the brain functions, altering moods, perceptions, and behavior. THC, the active ingredient in cannabis, can trigger anxiety, as can ecstasy, MDMA, and cocaine. Likewise, psilocybin, the psychoactive substance in magic mushrooms, is high on the list of panic-triggering substances. All of these drugs have a massive impact on our body's neurotransmitter balance and temporarily switch off some of our brain's protective systems. The interesting thing about this is that in certain ways, this can even make our brain more productive. You just have to think about famous painters and writers who have created great works under the influence of drugs, such as the best-selling author Stephen King, for instance. If you want to visualize the protective filter in the brain that are switched off by the consumption of drugs, then imagine removing the filter from a water supply. The water can flow a lot faster when the filter is not there, but dirt and particles in the water are now able to flow through the entire system, potentially causing major damage. And the comparable damage that might be inflicted on the brain here includes the formation of the neuronal connections that trigger panic attacks, for instance. If this happens just once, the risk of panic attacks recurring rises massively each time you take drugs. So if you suffer your first panic attack within 48 hours of consuming drugs, you should stop taking them immediately. And you should also be aware that it makes no difference whether this is the first time you take that specific drug or you have had years of experience using it. Once your body has reacted to a substance with a panic attack, then this substance should be off limits for you from then on, even and in fact especially when you are feeling better again. Because by then, if you use drugs again, you are at a very high risk of triggering renewed panic attacks because your brain has already undergone this experience and remembers it. And when we're on the subject, your mental preoccupation with the panic attack, in other words, what keeps going through your mind afterwards, can also be just as devastating for you as the drugs themselves are. Because the more you keep on thinking about what's not right with you anymore, and whether it's going to stay like that for the rest of your life, the more you create fear or anxiety-triggering neuronal connections in your brain. And then they ensure that a kind of continuous automated program develops in your brain, and that from just one single bad experience. Now, of course, it's very easy to say that you shouldn't think about the panic and anxiety when you're really feeling terrible. But it is one of the most effective approaches here that is able to free you quickly from your fears. And it is true that simply trying to distract yourself when you feel a panic attack coming on may not be a solution that can work over the long term, but it is an initial short-term step. And in the next episode of our podcast series, I intend to have a closer look at what does give excellent help and support over the mid to long term. That's it for today. Look forward to the next episode of this podcast to be released very soon. As always, thank you so much for listening. I hope today too there was plenty of useful information for you. And if you want to learn more, have a look at our website, the-anxiety-cure.com. All the best. Your Klaus Bernhard.